You know, this wasn't like he's thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to bunker rush a lot against Quanro. I don't think that's what it was. I think it's more he was preparing for OSL and didn't want to practice quite as much, so he had a few more bunker rushes mixed in. You notice he didn't really bunker rush quite as much against Jaedong in the MSL. We'll get to that in a little bit. But, you know, bunker rush, if you do it too often, if you get known as a bunker rusher, people are going to be able to kind of figure that out. And there's some other intricacies in it as well. You know, if you're really all in on a bunker rush and they just surround with their drones just right, you're going to be in trouble. If they pool first, you're going to be in trouble. So you got to be careful how much you bunker rush, even though Flash has been using it to great effect. You know, another reason Flash can really do that is that he is the best macro player in the world. So, you know, if you go for pool first against him and he hasn't gone for a bunker rush, you're in deep, because he's going to have a lot of units and you're going to have slightly less than you should have if you had gone, you know, hatchery first. So that's why there. Alright, I'm a D+ Protoss wanting to switch to Terran. What are some major differences between the two races? Also, how should I learn Terran? Alright, learning Terran can be quite frustrating, especially in the foreigner scene. We don't really, it's not as easy to learn any of the races in the foreigner scene. And Terran really takes a lot of tiny little things that can be very frustrating to a player. You know, you have to have your turrets at exactly the right time. You have to really be quite a defensive player, so you don't get to really attack. The more you attack in an RTS game, the more you learn about your opponent, the quicker you learn about the game, you know, what he may or may not have. But when you're playing on the defense, you're kind of waiting for attacks to figure this out. So Terran is kind of more in that area, especially against Protoss and Terran. So it's kind of difficult to learn these things as a young Terran player. So how do you learn Terran? Well, you got to play a lot of games and just, I would say, read the Wikipedia a lot. It seems to be really good for lower level players. Watch some VODs here and there, watch replays, and ask other Terran players. You know, a lot of little tiny things Terrans can just say to you, and that will boost you ahead a lot quicker. And differences between the races. Terran actually takes a lot more speed. You know, all Protoss bashing aside, Terran takes a lot more speed to play, mechanically speaking. So, you know, you have to have your APM higher. It's a more defensive race, as I mentioned, and you know, it's a little bit harder to macro. So that's basically some of the main differences between the races. All right, now here is a good question here. Well, let me get this one first. How come Oz doesn't play Backo anymore? They always send out those garbage newbie Protosses instead of the glorious Backo. There is nothing glorious about Backo except how stupid he is. He is a horrible Protoss player, and I would rather see any Protoss sent out instead of him. His decision-making is some of the worst ever in the history of the game. Alright, now, alright, this is a somewhat related question. Artosis, I was wondering how lineups are chosen for Pro League, such as how Backo has only played 3 games in the last 3 months. Well, he's probably played only 3 in the last 3 months because he's bad, and they finally figured that out. Other than that, basically, every team does it a little bit different. Some teams have meetings where they all go over and decide who is going to play what map. You know, all the top players kind of go over it. Some teams actually do it just based upon the ranking league. You know, if you do best on this map, you're playing on it. Some teams, the coaches straight up decide. So there's all sorts of different ways. It really depends upon the team. And yeah, that's kind of how they do it. But normally there are ranking leagues involved ahead of time just to see kind of who is in really good shape this week. And let's see, any more good questions in here? Alright, hey Artosis, I was wondering how Idra was doing in the CJ house and if he's on his way to making the A-team anytime soon. Idra is actually doing quite well on CJ. In the most recent B-team full league that they had, he got 2nd place overall. So definitely one of the best B-teamers right now. But, you know, there's a lot of good players on CJ. I do not foresee Idra making it onto the A-team. StarCraft 2 is getting far too close, and I do believe that he will be switching over to that for CJ. You know, if things go as they should in Korea. You know, it just kind of makes sense to have a young player like him who hasn't hit Pro League yet, you know, move on to the new game and develop his skills there. So, while I don't see him making the A-team, he's very, very good right now as far as the CJB team does go. And anything else? Let's see. Oh, okay. Do you think that Guardians are useful, are a useful alternative for Zerg to use against Terran mid-game push? Well, I'll kind of go over something similar to this when I go over MSL in a little bit. You know, Guardians can be quite strong with the right strategy. You know, if they go tank heavy, they're extremely strong. If they are kind of going SK Terran, it's a little bit less strong. You really have to kind of pay attention exactly what's going on in the game. Sometimes you get a good timing off on your Guardians, where you've done a little bit of damage with the mutas, and their Wraiths and or Vessels are going to be late. And in situations like that, Guardians are great, but Guardians can definitely backfire. They cost a lot of gas, and if Terran just happens to have the right counter, the Guardians are not going to do very much. So you got to keep all that in mind. And, you know, I think that's about it for the Twitter questions. At the end of the show, I will have a little thing to show you how you can ask questions on the show or give feedback, anything like that, to help me make it better. So thanks to everyone who did send those in and the kind words, and all those jokers out there that try to pretend that there is a pro gamer better than Jaedong in this world. If there is, it sure as hell isn't Fatality. Okay, so let's move on to the Korean scene and talk about the MSL, or as I like to call it, the MSLOL, because it was a complete joke. This finals should have been the absolute best finals ever. It had Flash against Jaedong. Both are dominating at an unreal level that we have never seen before. And, you know, MSL had all this stuff lined up. And they started screwing it up right away. You know, they didn't slack off on the screwing up at all. They decided that it was going to be done in front of a blue screen where no one was, in some studio. And that in and of itself is corny as hell. They had all sorts of stars in the background and huge pictures of the players and stuff. And, you know, I don't know, it's just, it seems kind of silly. It's like they're stepping back in time. It reminded me of the old days, I'm talking 10 plus years ago, where you saw players sitting there with shiny spacesuits and they try to pretend that, like, oh, StarCraft, they're in the stars. That's kind of what it felt like. In addition to that, they only let fan club members in to actually watch the event. Just a couple really stupid ideas by NBC. They want to try something new, whatever. I would forgive them for that, but let's go on to what actually was happening in this series. Now, at Game 1, it was cold. This is what we have been told by Flash. It was cold, and he could not play correctly. Now, is this MSL or PGL? What is going on here? Is this some low-budget tournament, or is this Korea? Is this a StarLeague Finals? Who is it that is running this crap? Who is in there not noticing that it is cold before the match? If you're in there, if you actually know esports at all, you're going to be like, oh, it's cold in here. Maybe we should put a heater in. But no, it was cold the first game. Made for not so an exciting game. Jaedong took that down. I'm not saying he wouldn't have anyways, but come on now. You have to keep it warm for the players. StarCraft takes so much speed. You have to have your fingers so warm so the blood is moving so you can actually do your APM, do your moves, play correctly. So, you know, that's it's upsetting to see that, you know, they plug in this heater afterwards. It eventually overdoes the circuit and blacks everything out during Game 3. So Game 3 was not over, but they made the right call of giving Jaedong the win. Jaedong was ahead. You can't really make him replay from that spot, I don't think. You know, Flash is sitting on 2 base. Jaedong's up at 4, full tech. You know, Flash is good, but the game was going to be Jaedong's, realistically. And people who want to whine and complain about that, let me tell you something. This is not a baseball game, okay? This isn't some sport where, alright, we have 1 inning left, we're down 9 runs. Anything can still happen, technically. No, StarCraft isn't like that, okay? If you are a certain amount ahead, you are not going to lose, especially if you're Jaedong. I don't care who you're against. You're not going to lose. And the fact of the matter is, Koreans actually stay in games far, far, far too long. It's like they're remembering the old days where there were epic comebacks, such as, you know, these old Boxer games that you remember and hear about sometimes. But really, people were just so bad back then that, you know, there could be so many mistakes and so many brilliant plays, combinations from both players, that there could be epic comebacks. But nowadays, the game is so solved that, you know, you're not going to come back if Jaedong's ahead of you 4-2 at that point in the game. So it was the right call to give him the win, for sure. And it was really the wrong call by Flash's coaches and his parents and everything like that to really put him through this traumatic stuff of leaving